that up for that as I bevel this all off in here. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that yet. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Well, I think I'm just going to do this by eye. It could be a mistake, but that's what I'm going to try, and we'll see how it goes. Well, to my eye, that looks pretty darn good. Just needs some cleaning up now with some sandpaper. So I'll do a little bit of this kind of sanding off camera here, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get her cleaned up. My friends, even though I am the true one and only Batman, any resemblance to the bat emblems is strictly coincidental. Well, that's about as good as I can do, and I think that's going to be a really nice bridge. I'll probably work on it a little bit more here and there, but well, I'll show you what the next step is here in just a few minutes. Now it's time to trace the holes in this. Anyway, I'm just kind of eyeballing the alignment here, and I'll just take this fine pencil and trace all of the holes. They look like they're traced very well. So I think I'll just go ahead and drill those out and get that out of the way. I'm over here at the drill press. I have a 7/64 drill in here. Now for my millimeter friends, if you divide 64 by 7 and then divide that number by 40, you'll know how many millimeters it is. Very simple. Now after all that and all that calculating and figuring, you might be wondering, why did I pick that size drill bit? And I say just because I could. I just wanted something smaller than the next bit I'm going to use, which is 3/16. And once again, if you divide 3 by 16 and then divide that number by 40, you'll know how many millimeters. And I'm actually going to make it bigger than that, but I'm going to do 3/16 first. I'm stepping this up 3 times. So 3/16 is what I'm doing next. And I could stop at 3/16, but I find that that's just a little bit too small. So I'll go to the 1/64 of an inch bigger than that when I get there as my final drill. Well, that did a nice job. Now I'm just going to enlarge them just a tiny, tiny bit more. I'm going to use a 13/64. And the only reason I'm doing it that way is it just makes a nice smooth hole, doesn't have much tear out. At least that's been my experience. I could have probably went straight to this bit, but there's a very good chance you'll have some tear out if you do that. So just trying to avoid that as much as possible. Don't get me wrong, you could easily do that just twice and be perfectly fine, but doing it 3 times just increases the hole ever so slightly, and it seems to not do too much tear out. So that's what I did just because I could. Now I'm going to take the little step drill and ream the holes just a little bit. I really like the way the step drill does it. I don't find any tear out or chatter, and I've got a whole bunch of different countersink bits that I've bought and tried, and every single one of them gives me some kind of chatter or tear out, or at least the potential thereof. This seems to avoid all of that, and so that's why I do it. And it's the only thing I found that avoids all of it. Well, I keep turning my light off, but there you go. And I'll show you that at the bench. It'll be a little clearer at the bench. Okay, now we've got a lot of little processes to do. I would like to be able to mark where this bridge goes so that we could clean this off and glue it down. But to do that, first of all, I do have to have my intonation rig on here in order to do that. So I'd have to have an end pin, and I would have to have you know, a nut and some tuning keys. Otherwise, I can't hook it all up. So I guess we'll start on the tuning keys and get those knocked out. We've got the Waverly tuning keys with the real pearl buttons, or, you know, mother of pearl, but it's real shell, and beautiful keys. And we're going to put those in here. And originally I tested this, and I know it should have fit, but now the varnish and things have filled up the holes. So the hole on the other side, by the way, is oversized, so I should be able to drill through this side without affecting the front. And I'm just going to try to line it up here by hand. And then we'll see if we can fit a key in here. And it seems to go. Now the truth is, the front is going to be filled up with varnish too. So I think I'll try, before I do this, I think I'll clean up the hole on the front. Now I may just clean that up with a X-Acto knife because I don't want to take a chance on any chip out or tear out at this point. It's a lot more work, but it also guarantees that I'm not going to have a problem. The trick of this is you have to cut with the grain. So those two there have been reamed a little bit. Let's just see if they're in the ballpark for letting the ferrules go in. Probably, but wouldn't hurt if they were reamed a little bit more. So you can see what I'm doing there. I'm just cleaning the holes out. I'm just going to do all that off camera, and I'll show you what it looks like on the next step. Okay, so I have those cleaned out. Now, because I'm getting ready to press these ferrules in here, and they're going to be permanent, you can't, I mean, you can get them out, but then you also risk chipping something too. So because I'm putting them in and I'm going to call it permanent, I'm going to try to clean this up and buff it out and get that ready before I do that, because it's much harder to do after you get the ferrules in there. It's all a process. So I've got some 600 here. Now I could do this with steel wool, but the problem with doing it with steel wool is it still kind of leaves the little imperfections. It doesn't level it very well. So I'm going to, you know, like there's little bumps and things, and it doesn't level the little bumps. So that's why I'm using the 600. Just like you can see right there, there's little tiny bumps. And they're very tiny. They look horrible this way, but they're very small, and they sand out very quickly. but they don't necessarily come out with the steel wool. That's why why I prefer this, even though the varnish manufacturer recommends steel wool for their finish. The only problem with this 600 is that it loads up very quickly. As you can see, the little dots on there, perhaps those little dots, you know, are thick spots, and they don't come off very easy. So that part's aggravating, very aggravating, I might add. So you use a lot of sandpaper when you do it this way. If they made the other sandpaper in a 600, that would just be awesome. It wouldn't load up, but I don't think they do. And I think that's pretty much got it. There's little grain flaws in this, and they're just going to be there. That's all I can tell you. I try my best, and that grain filler stuff, it just doesn't work. And you know, other people, I like their emails. They'll say, yeah, if you put it on 4 times, the grain filler works great. Well, yeah, sure. But that's the point. You have to put it on 4 times, 5 times. You know, I might as well just skip that process and go straight to the finish, because it works just about as well as grain filler. And the other problem with grain fillers is you don't know what they're going to do to the color or the sound. And some of them have definitely changed the color a lot or changed the sound. Okay, so that's pretty good. I think what I'll do now is switch over to my semi-chrome and a little bit of water. You just need a dab of water. You don't need much. And all I do is just dampen the very tip of my finger here in the water, just like that. That's all. And even that, I kind of dry it out a little bit. Just a teeny little dab of semi-chrome, almost the smallest that you can get. And then you just start working it in a circular motion like this. It's getting there. It's going to take a little bit more work. It's a little tough to do this because of all the holes. That's looking pretty good. It's not bad. I think I'll work on it a little bit more off camera, and then we'll move on. Well, I got the top looking pretty decent, so I'm going to do the back here now. And again, I'll start with the 600, just lightly sanded. I'm not sanding hard. It's just to knock it flat and get rid of the little bumps. And then we'll just clean that off, hit it with a little semi-chrome. I'm not going to be quite as particular on the back side here, but you know, you still want it to look pretty decent. See a spot here that's giving me a little bit of trouble, so I'm going to sand it a little bit more, and I believe I can get rid of it. It looked like almost a run is what it almost looked like, but I didn't really get any runs in putting the finish on it this time, and typically I do. It's really hard to spray on that oil varnish without getting a run, but I didn't really find any runs this time, knock on wood. I believe that looks acceptable for the back of the peg head there. And so let's start putting the tuning keys on it and see where that takes us. I think what we need to do first is to press these things into place. And they don't go in easy, but they're not crazy hard either. So what I do is typically take a screwdriver, one that'll fit it, and it fits that, but it doesn't fit the hole in the back. Yeah, it does. It's going through, but just barely. But that's good. That's what it's almost perfect. And then maybe I'll take this plastic hammer and just tap it down in there. And I have to get where I can see it better. It's almost in there, but it's not. By putting it in your hand like this, that also absorbs the shock. And I'm just watching that I don't drive it too deep. I just want to get it down touching. That looks like that's touching. So there you go. And see if we can't do one more that way. That one goes in a little deeper on its own, which is helpful. And kind of have to finagle it down in that other hole. Could probably put a little wax on these, would maybe make it go a little bit better, but on the other hand, I don't really want these coming out, so I think if you can get them to fit really well like they are fitting, and without putting wax on them, you're probably better off. I'm not really aligning them or anything, I'm just driving them in random. I guess you could align the points or something, but I don't know. That's pretty hard to do and get it to look right, so I'm just putting them in random. I believe that's going to do that. So there you go. Works really well. It's a good way to do it. Sounds worse than it is. It's, you know, I'm using a plastic hammer there, tapping on a piece of plastic. It just, you know, you get all that extra vibration and sound out of the instrument itself. So anyway, I think we're doing well there. Now we just need to start aligning everything. And the easiest way to do this, I think, is just to put all the things in the hole and then see if they're straight, because they don't always line up straight. And then you just got to line them up by eye to make sure they look straight. And I do different things to accomplish that. Often I take this kind of a ruler and lay it in there and make sure they're all aligned with that. Sometimes that works good, sometimes it doesn't work all that great. It really depends on a lot of things, the shape of the peg head, all kinds of things. And like even the shape of the tuning keys themselves, sometimes you can align them this way and sometimes you just can't. And right now I'm having trouble with it, so I'll think on it a little bit here and decide the best way to align it, and then I'll show you. Because you do want to try to get them as aligned as perfect as you can, because they do look weird if they're not all perfectly symmetrical. Okay, this is, you know, for the average person, probably overkill, but sometimes overkill's good. You know, it's really much more difficult to line these up than you might think that it is. You know, just the least little bit of out of alignment makes them look really bad. So like even though I have a straight edge there against this, it's still not perfectly there yet. And this has rubber pads on both sides of this clamp, and I'm really not tightening it very tight. I'm just snugging it up just so that it, and then I'm trying to get the flat part of these tuning keys. Let me just pull one out and I'll show you what the problem is. You can't put a straight edge, a thin straight edge, it slides under it real easy. You want a thicker straight edge, but it also needs to be thin enough to go under this rivet. So I just made myself a real straight piece of wood, and that way I can line up this flat edge of all these tuning keys, and that's about as close as I'll get. And honestly, even then it's not It's not that easy. It's just, you'd think it would be easier than it is, and it just isn't that easy. So I'm doing the best I can with what I got to work with. And I'll take this awl now, and I'll try to eyeball the center hole there. I don't think I have any punches that are small enough to go down in here. I might have, I don't know. That center punch set that I have might be small enough to fit in those holes, but I'll double check that. If it is, it would be perfect. Well, I'm not 100% sure that this 1/8 inch center punch will work, but I'm going to try it first. Seems like it might have. Yeah, I think it's working. And now I just want to try to keep these other ones straight as I put it in here. Ah, wouldn't you know? Alright, well, before I go through the hassle of doing that on the other side, I'll make sure this one's lined up right. So we'll drill this one out and get these in and see what they look like and see how well that worked. It seemed like it worked pretty well. Alright, I'm ready to drill the little holes, and you'll always want to size your bit. And the best way to size it really is visually, and you can put your bit right on top of the screw, and you should be able to see threads on both sides of the screw, but just barely see the threads. As long as you can see threads on both sides of this bit, then you should have the right size bit. I also have this marked as a depth, so that I know I won't go too deep, because it would be a total disaster to drill through the peg head. So you can imagine how bad that would be. So I've double checked, and the depth I have on this is just about right. And I usually stop just a hair short of that depth, just to play it even safer. And then I just approximate what looks like square to me. All right, so let's see if this process produced a aligned set of tuning keys. I'm hoping it did. Honestly, it's really hard to even guess that it is right or not. Honestly, it's way harder than you might think. I'm looking for my little screwdriver, and it's evading me. I did put wax on this. I'll use this one. I don't like this one because the barrel on this screwdriver is too long. I like to be able to get down close to the screw. I'm going to try a different one. That one's not working that great. This is not the one I was looking for either, but I think it'll work better. Yeah, this is working okay. Again, I always wax the screws. I'm using beeswax in this particular case. Beeswax is a good choice. Paraffin works probably just as well or better. Alright, so now let me look at it objectively here and see if they look like they're straight. They look pretty good, pretty good. Let's look this way. Sometimes you'll see something on this side that you don't see on the other side. And they're pretty darn straight. If I'm being really critical, this one looks just the teeniest amount candid to me, but it's so minor that I don't think anyone would even see it. And I don't think you guys can see it either in the camera, but someone will tell me they can. That's okay. Alright, so this one I haven't aligned yet. I got to get it aligned. So we'll go through that process yet again. Best thing to look at is that flat edge, and if that flat edge is straight, then it should be straight. That looks pretty good to me. I'm thinking about just forgetting the clamps this time and trying it like this. I don't know, that might be a mistake. Okay, now we'll put the screws in and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute. Well, that looks about as aligned as I can get it right there. So I think that worked out pretty well. Looks good, you know, so I think that worked out fine. Next thing is we got to make a nut. Off camera I fitted a piece of elk antler in here. Actually I did it twice. I liked it so much I did it a second time. The reason I did it a second time was after I got it all fitted up, I wasn't happy with the piece of antler. It had a lot of porosity in it that I didn't see, and so I decided to make it again, and that's what I did. So now I have just eyeballed in the two outer strings where I think they should go, and I will take my little saw and saw the grooves, get them started. I'm not going to get them real deep yet. Just getting them where they'll hold the string pretty well. So now we'll move on to putting the strings on this thing, at least for the intonation setup here. The action looks like it's going to be pretty low at that spot there, so we'll put them. Kind of find a old saddle here that looks like it might be about the right height. This is sitting on top of this, of course. This is going to be kind of, so I have to find one that's not too tall. What I need to do now is measure, and we measure to the 12th fret. And I'm getting just about 322 millimeters approximately. And 322, we're pretty close right there. Alright, so now I'll tune it up. So let's see what it tunes up. We'll start to hear it to make some noise. And the saddle, of course, is going to keep bouncing around here. Going to have a deep tone. Get the tuner here and get a pick out of here so that we can sit down and do this properly. Well, I just dropped the pick inside. That's always helpful. Well, let's just see where the intonation is. Not too terribly far off. We're not too far off, so we're already in the ballpark. I need to write a song with just the two E strings. Listen to the sustain. It's got sustain coming out the ears. It's really got the sustain. You can feel the whole body vibrating on this thing. I can still feel the whole body vibrating right now even. Just about there. It's kind of stopped where I can barely feel it. It's crazy. It's really got the sustain. So it's going to be nice once we get it all figured out. I'm going to do some measuring off camera here and just make sure I've got things centered, and and then all I'm really wanting to do right now is just mark the location for the bridge, and then once we get the bridge glued on, then we'll do this whole thing again and put the saddle on here, float the saddle on the bridge, and then mark where we want to cut the slot. I really prefer to do it that way. I mean, I could cut the slot in the bridge ahead of time and then you float this around, but the problem with doing that is you don't know, and your bridge could end up being at an angle, and I don't like that. I want it to look straight and perfect, and that's why I do it the way I do it. It could easily be done the other way, but when you're setting the intonation with this method, you don't know where you're going to end up. So that's why I do it the long, drawn-out way. Okay, off camera, I've done a lot of measuring across this way to make sure it's centered. I also look at the center line going down through here. All that looks pretty good. The intonation on it right now is a little bit off, but I'm not too worried about that yet. I want to try to get the action real close. You want to get everything pretty darn close before you commit to anything, and especially on something custom made like this. So let me just check how high it is right now. It's probably pretty high, I imagine. Actually, it's not. It's only at 100 thousandths, or just a little over that, maybe 105. That's not too terribly bad. On the high E, I think we're even better. Yeah, we're about 90 on that one, so we're really not too far off. In fact, I don't think I'm going to change the saddle end. I think I'm going to change the nut end. The nut's pretty darn high. I can see that for sure. So I think off camera, I'm going to file these two slots down quite a bit. Try to get them close, to proper height, and then we'll check the action again, and then we'll fine-tune the intonation. So it's just a process, and yeah, I know they don't do it this way in the factories, but I don't know that they get 100% perfect results in the factories. Well, after many iterations and minor adjustments here and there and everywhere, I think I've got it as close as I can get it. It notes pretty darn well. The action's really low right now as in this temporary setup. It's probably a hair too low, if anything. And the only thing that bothers me about that is if I set it up to the right height, it may be a little bit sharp. But so you can see here, pretty much dead center. I'll zoom it in a little bit more, maybe you can see the tuner even a little better. You can see it's pretty well dead center there, open. Adjusting it a little bit just to make sure I get it as close as I can. Pretty darn centered when you tap it. So we're real close to it being exactly where I want it. But I don't rush into anything on this. I'm going to let it set a little while, come back out and test it again, perhaps after lunch even, because I just don't want to make a mistake on this. I want to get it as perfect as I can get it. The closer you can get that intonation, the better the whole instrument sounds. Well, I waited a few minutes. I didn't wait very long, maybe 10 minutes here. And I double checked my side-to-side measurements to make sure it's in the center. I double checked square to make sure it's square to the center line, and everything checks out. And this saddle, testing it, it's at a pretty good angle, but that's kind of typical of these dreadnought guitars. Often the bass string is sharp on a lot of the Martins and other dreadnoughts, and you have to end up compensating it back. So this will have the compensation built in, if you will. It does really check very, very close on the tuner. The action's pretty darn close to where I want it, so I think I'm good. And you know, keep in mind that all I'm doing at this point is just locating the bridge. Then I'm going to go through this whole process again to locate the saddle. But right now we're just locating the bridge, and I'm convinced that it's close enough to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and scratch in my lines all the way around this, and then we're going to take the finish off. Looks real good. I think that's all I can do. So I'm going to take the strings off, and we'll start peeling off that finish. Well, I don't think that could have gone too much better. You can see the little scratch in there. I imagine you can see it. Though in the viewfinder at the moment, I can't tell what you're seeing. So anyway, it looks pretty good to me. So now I get that fun job of stripping that all off of there. So no time like the present, we just might as well get started. So I just come in with my little tool that I made. It's got a finger plane blade in the end of it, and I just start very lightly peeling the finish off, trying not to cut the wood. But you can see this is going to be a little bit like watching paint dry, so I'm just going to keep doing this for the next hour or so, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get it done. Well, there she is. I got it done. Yeah, that was tedious. Wasn't real super hard, just tedious. Once I established which way the grain wanted to be worked, it wasn't as bad. That's about as good as I can do. So I'll clean the back side of this up with a little acetone. I may actually sand that a little bit too, and maybe even scrape it with the tooth blade just a little bit. And again, I don't try to make real deep grooves in it at all. I just I don't want it glass smooth is the only thing. So I'm just trying to rough it a little bit, but not make it so rough. It's hard to explain. There's just a happy medium. When you feel it and it feels like glass, that's not quite as good as if you feel it very smooth, but yet it doesn't feel like glass, if that makes any sense. That's where I'm headed. No time like the present, so I'm going to put the glue on this. I might just add that I've said this many times, but this is not the time or place to get in a hurry. Take your time, spread the glue perfectly, work it back and forth with a brush like this, because if you don't, it leaves little tiny air bubble pockets and things, and you want to make sure that it's 100% coverage. You only get one chance at this, hopefully, and you don't want to have a second chance. So just take a little extra time, make sure it's brushed in really good like that. Do the same thing here. Now you don't necessarily want to make it thick, you just want to get a nice thin, perfectly covered coat. In fact, really the thinner the better. Alright, so this one's really floaty. The finish on this is super thin, so it's not helping me hold it in place very well. So I'm going to have to do a little extra work here to get this to hold in place, because the truth is it really wants to slide a lot. And of course I don't want it to slide. Ordinarily, the finish is thick enough that you can feel it fall into the pocket. That's not the case in this one. This finish is super thin. It feels like a good finish. I don't think that's a problem. But this sprayed on oil varnish, it just went on super thin. And that's kind of good too, because if it didn't, it would run. Alright, well, I'm going to have to turn the camera off here and do a little bit of rigging with some clamps and things, but I'll show you what it ends up looking like. You can see I'm slipping the caul in here. I've got some two-way tape on it. I don't know if it'll hold on that caul or not. Sometimes it will after the clamps are on it and holding it there for a day or two. But on its own, it's kind of hard to get that two-way tape even to hold. Might hold it there long enough for me to get the clamps on it. Okay, I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on it, just a little bit, so I can manipulate the bridge and get it exactly where I want it. And now I'm going to get a rag and wipe it real clean to make sure I've got it right where I want it. Well, my friends, I'm declaring today last hurrah day, because I'm pretty sure we're going to get this thing together, at least in terms of playability. It won't be finalized today, but it'll be playable today, and that means that today will be the date that I will put the on the label, which will go inside the guitar. So at least that's what I'm planning, unless I get some kind of major interruption or something. So here we go. Well, I'm gonna start by drilling the holes the rest of the way through the top. Okay, I've got the Intonation Rig back on here with the 2 E strings, and I have a saddle floating around on top of this bridge. There's no slot, of course. Alright, let me check the action to see if it's close, because I want to get it close before I decide the final intonation. It's actually a little low. It's only about 65 on the bass, and it's only about 55 on the treble. So I need a taller saddle, which is fine. I don't want to get it much higher, but it doesn't need to be a whole lot higher, I don't think. But I do want it a little higher. That'll just make it even have that much more sound. So let me come up with something and I'll show you what I have. Well, I just pulled out of my Carta saddle. It's not as, I can already tell there's a little more muting sound going on with that than I can with the antler, but it sounds pretty good. And the action's quite a bit higher, so I'm checking it here to see how much I need to reduce that saddle. Call it 110 on that side. And I'm gonna go my typical 90 and 80. So it's 30 thousandths too much on this side, so that means I gotta take 60 thousandths off the saddle on the treble. And it's 30 thousandths too high on the bass also. So I will take 60 off the whole bottom of this saddle. Okay, I've cut the saddle down. I have not yet measured the height. I will use the in-size taper gauge again. Here is a good look at that gauge. Hopefully it'll focus on that. Anyway, it's in size number 4630-1E, and it's called a taper gauge. It's a machinist tool. It's highly accurate and it's expensive. It's like close to $70. So there you go. You can get them on eBay. Boy, you know what? That measures right at 90 thousandths. It's almost like I know what I'm doing. Let's see if this measures at 80. Well, honestly, this one measures about 85, so I'm slacking a little bit. Thickness of a human hair. Okay, so let's check the intonation now. It's a hair flat, which I don't really want because that means I got to move this forward a little bit. Although this is a rounded top, so that makes a difference. That is just about perfect in my book. So I'm going to mark that, and I'm going to mark the front edge, although, you know, honestly, I'm not happy with that saddle because it has a rounded top. I don't like the rounded top. I like the angled top. So I'm going to angle this top. That's going to change my height a little bit. I wish I'd have thought of it ahead of time, but I didn't think of it. So I am going to angle this just a teeny bit, just so that that front edge is the last place the string touches. And then we'll set the intonation one more time. Pretty darn close. That's pretty darn close. I'm going to monkey with that just a bit off camera and make sure I'm satisfied. Then all I'm going to do is mark the front edge of the saddle on both ends, and then we'll set up to saw that slot in there, and I'll show you how I do that here in a minute. You can see I've got the Intonation Rig on here, and what I'm doing is I'm running the straight edge right down the edge of the fretboard, and I'm going to mark the end of that, and then I'll do it on the other side and mark the end of that. And I'm just looking at that to see if that's where I want the saddle to end or not. It's a little bit off, I would say, so I'm going to just eyeball it here now, and just I want to come all the way out to about where it starts to curl down. This one's pretty close to that, about here, just a little bit. Now I'll get the Dremel tool all loaded up with the bit, and I'll be back shortly. I've got the line alignment pretty darn good. I've traced the line several times, and the bit follows the line really well, and I'm routing the hole on that side of the line, or the slot I should say. I found myself just a saddle that measures about 115 thousandths. I've got everything locked in place. The depth gauge is all the way down, so what I can do is put this under the depth gauge, and just like that, lock it down, and now pull that out, and now I know I can plunge exactly 115 thousandths of an inch down, and that way, so that'll be my first pass. I'll make my first pass at 115 thousandths. So I might as well go ahead and do that right now real quick. We'll get that first pass out of the way. Okay, that worked out pretty well. Now I'll just repeat that process. I'm going to add another 100 and so thousandths on here and route the next one. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished. Trying to shortcut my process here to get closer on my first attempt. So what I'm going to do, this is the saddle I had in there, and I'm just going to measure the overall height of it, including the depth of the slot. I'm going to measure that a couple times. Well, that came out to the exact same measurement twice, so let's see if third time's a charm. Close enough. So I'm going to make this about 480 thousandths tall, which is real close to a ½ inch tall, but it goes down in the saddle pretty far too. In fact, let's just measure that and see how far down it goes. It goes 200 and almost a ¼ inch down in the saddle, so that's, or in the slot, so that's a good thing. Anyway, I'm going to start working on figuring that out, on the shape of this. Well, I've cut a saddle that fits that slot pretty darn well. It looks a little tall to me, but I don't think it is much. I think, well, it probably will end up being a little bit too tall. You know, it's always easier to cut them down than to make them taller, so we'll see where we end up here. It is now that exciting moment when at least I'm going to start putting strings on it. I don't know if we'll be able to play it yet or not. Well, I got all the strings on it. They're not tightened up yet. So let's bring the tuner out here, and you can listen to it being tuned up for the very, very, very first time. Today is Thursday, November 4th for the calendar purposes, so that's the date that will go on the label when I put the label in later. But right now, we're at the utilitarian duty of tuning this baby up, and I'm kind of anxious to hear what she sounds like. I always recommend tuning all strings. Don't just tune one string up. Bring them all up kind of evenly. And I recommend that on any instrument, not just a brand new one. All right, let's just hit one chord on it, and then I'll see what the action is here, because I think that, well, I'll check the action first. The action is really high. I don't think we're going to try to play it like this. Let me see here. It's 125 thousandths, so that's pretty high. And it's about 115 thousandths, so 125, 115. So that's too high to really play it very well, but we'll at least let you hear one chord on it before we take it apart and fix the saddle. I'm pretty good with that. Got a creamy sound. Going to be really nice when we get the action down on this. It's just a little too high to really do much with it right now. So I'm going to do a little bit of action work, and we'll be back and show you what it really sounds like. Well, my friends, I really like the guitar. Take a listen to it now. I mean, I'm not saying it's the best sounding guitar in the world, but I'm saying it's just as good as any you could get anywhere. And keep in mind, the finish is only a little over a week old. I think that a couple of things it's got going for it is that the finish is really thin on it. It's not a thick finish at all. And it's an oil varnish. And the sides and back are pretty thin on this guitar. It's just got it. I really couldn't be much happier with the sound of it. Sound-wise, playing-wise, it's pretty good. I'll be honest, the neck is a little bit heavier than I thought it was going to feel like. So, and it's mostly reaching around it, so it's kind of a wide neck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take the draw file here, and I'm going to file off some of the edges of the neck here and kind of round it a little bit quicker. I think that'll make it feel a little bit better because it is a little bit wide. It's not crazy wide or anything like that, but it's just, you know, I'm just trying to make it as good as I can make it, and I think I can make it a little bit better by narrowing it down. That's one of the real advantages of not finishing the neck. Having an unfinished neck and just oiling it, you can adjust it and shape it and do anything you want to it. So it's pretty easy. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm taking this is a double cut, pretty smooth file. It's a small file. It's only about I don't know if that's a 6-inch or maybe even smaller. But anyway, it's a double cut, but it's got a fine teeth on it. So I'm just kind of rounding this off. Well, the finish has had yet another week to get a little more cured on this, and it's pretty good, but you can still feel little tiny bumps in it, just mostly dust particle type things. So I'm going to take the sandpaper to it now. This is 600, and I'm basically just trying to knock it level, you know, just get rid of the little dust particles and things. I'm not trying to do a full-blown heavy-duty sanding. It's a lot of work sanding these by hand, and I'm probably not going to film much more of this, but I'm going to basically do this whole thing like this. Then I'm going to probably get out the semi-chrome polish and polish it by hand all over the whole instrument. It just takes really a long time, and that's just the bottom line. It'll be a couple-hour job, I'm sure, but it's worth it in the end. And I'll wax it with the Renaissance wax, and it'll be ready to put on the pickguard and the truss rod cover, and we can call it finished then. We're getting toward the end on this last Hurrah guitar, and I've sanded it all very lightly with 600 grit sandpaper to knock off the dust particles and things like that. I tried to buff it straight from there. That's not working at all. I don't know if you can see the little kind of like, it's not gritty, but it's just not a smooth, perfectly smooth surface. Anyway, this seems to be doing the best job on it. So I'm taking triple-aught steel wool, rubbing it like this, and that seems to be making it one smooth surface. And I don't think it's taking off a lot of the finish. It's just buffing it all out where it all looks about the same is what it seems like. I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, I'm gonna go through the whole instrument with this now. Don't know if that'll show up, but I buffed this area right here with the polish, and you can kind of see that that's shiny. The rest of the guitar is very matted, matte finish. But I did buff that. I think you can see the circle of the light in here, that it's buff showing up. So that was just a real quick hand buffing, and that's working pretty darn good. So I guess the steel wool was the right approach, because before I did that, it didn't seem to have any effect at all. So it looks like it's working pretty good. I'm going to continue with the semichrome and hand polish this top. Getting ready to put the label in the guitar. It is 54I, meaning the 54th instrument, 11G, the 11th guitar. So, and the date is November 4th, 2021. Now, today's already a couple weeks past that, but that was the day I strung it up and played it, and that's the date I always use. Many people say, why don't you put that in there before you build the instrument and all that? Well, I don't know the date, number one. And number two, it's not hard to put them in like this. And some people would say you should have it unstrung to put this in there, but honestly, it's still not hard. I can put the label in there. Anyway, trust me, if you can do all these other things, putting the label in is like nothing. I'm using just plain old Elmer's glue on this one. It works pretty good for labels, things like that. And of course you want to put on as much glue as possible to make just as big a mess as you possibly can. You don't want to go conservative. And obviously I'm being facetious, but I did get a little more glue there than I needed. Alright, so I'll lay it in there. And then you can take a large brush or just a artist brush and move it where you want it without too much trouble. Yeah, I'll be honest, this one didn't quite work as nice as some of them. I let it stick down a little bit early, but at least it's straight. It's a little higher than I was planning on. I would have gotten it down just a little bit, but it's close enough. And a label is just a label after all. But I used the paintbrush to push it down. And so there she is. I think you can see it. Try to get it up close. So she's done. That part's done. Now I'm going to do some more little details to it before I tell the folks that this thing is ready to go. Well, my friends, it's that day. You know, that day when the customer comes and picks up the last Hurrah guitar. We've got this planned out this way. It's going to Paul Wood, who is Melissa's husband. And anyway, he doesn't know about it yet. It's a surprise. He's also a builder, so I'm bringing him here under the ruse of I'm going to build onto the front of my shop. And I may do that actually, but that's the ruse anyway. And then when he comes in to look at the plans, I'm going to say, hey, you want to take a look at the last Hurrah guitar? And then, of course, it's got his name in it, so that ought to give it away, I would think. We'll see how it goes. Wish me luck. Anyway.
Should you get done with the... Oh, you're getting ready to ship it out?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to ship it out.
Wow, that's beautiful. How you doing, brother? Wow.
Might as well take a look at it. Wait one second.
That's
Let me
beautiful.
get in here. God, your hair's all over it.
Yeah.
Jesus, criminellis.
Long hair guitar players.
It's a pretty good,
Wow.
pretty good little guitar.
Wow. What? What?
I think you knew about it all along.
No, you're joking me. What? You guys are crazy. This is. Am I dreaming? You're kidding me.
Another boat paddle.
You been in on it. You was in on it. Are you kidding me? Is this a joke?
No, it is not a joke.
This guy was a bottom. You're kidding me. What?
We'll hit a note on it. So you see, I guess it's in tune. I tuned it
I don't know what.
a couple hours ago.
I don't know what to say. I really don't. Wow. You're kidding me, you guys.
You don't want it to be not. Yeah, that's what you said. If ever you didn't get that guitar, so are you disappointed?
No. Sorry, Emery. You're kidding me. And she drove me along with it too. in shell shock.
You're in shell shock.
I can't believe it. Can't believe it. You guys tricked me. You're kidding me.
Ain't that inlay beautiful, that Paul wood? How's the neck feel?
Wow.
Man, I think about them Waverly tuning keys.
Wow.
Those are killer tuning
How does
keys.
the neck feel?
Wow, I'm like a Cadillac. I still didn't look at you guys, this is a joke, ain't it? Whose name's really under there? You're kidding me. Wow. You guys are sneaky.
Well, if it's something you don't like about it, I'm happy to give you your money back.
How's the neck
No
feel
problem.
as far as the size? Does he?
The neck's a little bit wide this way. I kind of, but the thickness of it's about exactly the same as Mark. It is probably a hair wider. Did you see the truss rod cover?
I know it's got bonus on it. That is hilarious.
Yeah, that's his band nickname. He's been bonus for years. Well, play us a song for us.
I don't know. I'm just speechless. I don't think. Oh, man. Wow. You guys.
You want me to kick it?
Kick it around.
I think you can pass on that.
Yeah, outdoor. Good job, buddy.
Good job.
Thank you, brother.
That was awesome.
Yeah, that was not
You
bad.
might actually know your way up and down a fretboard.
The guitar does all the work. I just pointed in the right direction.
Holy mackerel! Basically, I just never seen nothing like it.
You're right.